Just days after Eli's public confrontation at the HOA meeting, the retaliation began. At first, it was subtle, another warning for improper landscaping due to a single wildflower patch in the backyard. Then came a notice about a missing architectural approval for repainting the front door, even though Eli had used the original color. But the real blow landed when a thick envelope arrived by certified mail. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter from the HOA's law firm. "Dear Mr. Carpenter," it read, "you are hereby ordered to cease all unauthorized structural modifications to the property located at 218 Willow Crest Lane, including but not limited to roof replacements, exterior paint alterations, and any driveway expansion. Failure to comply will result in civil penalties and court action, including liens and forced remediation." Eli stared at the paper, heart pounding. He hadn't modified anything. The driveway was untouched. The roof repairs had been made by his father years earlier, well before the new HOA regulations were enacted. It was clear this was an orchestrated move, Linda's way of punishing him for speaking out. That afternoon, a white SUV pulled up in front of the house. Out stepped two men wearing navy polo shirts embroidered with the Glenwood Ridge HOA seal. One held a clipboard. The other had a camera slung around his neck. "We're here to conduct a compliance inspection," the man said. Curtly, Eli refused them entry. "This is private property," he said. "Come back with a warrant." The men didn't argue. They simply turned and left, but not before snapping photos of his gutters and porch. The next day, a violation notice arrived. Unauthorized obstruction of compliance inspection. $500 fine. Eli knew now. Linda wasn't just enforcing rules. She was trying to break him. Frustrated but undeterred, Eli dug deeper. If Linda wanted a war, he'd fight back with facts. Late into the night, while his father slept upstairs, Eli pored through the HOA's annual financial reports. They were accessible through the community portal, but barely anyone read them. Most of the line items were vague: general maintenance, beautification initiative, compliance fund disbursements. But something felt off. The numbers didn't add up. Over $85,000 had been allocated in the past fiscal year for security consulting. Eli knew from speaking to neighbors that no new security system had been installed, no upgrades made, and consulting seemed like a cover term for the compliance officers in the black SUVs. Even more questionable was the President's Discretionary Fund, which totaled nearly $24,000. There were no itemized expenses, no receipts, just a signature from Linda authorizing the transactions. He contacted an old college friend who now worked as a municipal auditor and sent him the reports. Within hours, his friend replied, "This is shady as hell. Misappropriation at best, embezzlement at worst. She's funneling dues into a private enforcement program. Could be illegal." Eli saved the email, printed hard copies of everything, and began compiling a file, a growing dossier on Linda Hargrave and her misuse of HOA power. At first, no one wanted to talk. Fear still clung to the community like thick humidity. But small cracks began to show. It started with Mr. Grayson, a retired firefighter who lived 2 streets over. One morning, Eli found him standing beside his rusted mailbox, shaking his head. "She fined me $300 for excessive smoke from my grill last weekend," he muttered. "I've lived here for 25 years and never seen anything like this." Eli asked if he'd ever considered challenging the fines. Grayson hesitated, then nodded. "It's about time someone did." Soon, others came forward. Mrs. Dietrich left a note in Eli's mailbox. "You're brave. We need you. Call me." The Baileys, newer residents, shared stories of being pressured into repainting their home twice in 6 months. Even Marcus, Eli's childhood friend, offered to help dig into HOA spending records after work. They met in secret, usually at the community park, sometimes in garages or living rooms with drawn blinds. They formed a loose coalition of concerned residents who called themselves the Glenwood Watch. What started as a handful grew into nearly a dozen within weeks. They weren't ready for open rebellion, but they were ready to act. Eli knew that taking down Linda through formal HOA channels would be hard but not impossible. According to the bylaws, any group of residents could initiate a vote of no confidence in the president if they collected signatures from at least 35% of homeowners and presented evidence of financial misconduct or abuse of power. It was a narrow path, but it was legal. With the help of the Glenwood Watch, Eli drafted a formal petition. The document demanded a third-party audit of all HOA finances over the past 3 years and called for a special meeting to vote on Linda Hargrave's removal as president. They started knocking on doors quietly, after dark, or on weekends when the compliance officers were less visible. At first, people were reluctant. Some closed doors. Others murmured support but refused to sign. But once the petition passed 20 signatures, momentum built. Stories began circulating of Linda waiving fines for those who attended her private dinner parties or contributed to her community gift fund. The idea that she was profiting off fear changed the tone. By week 3, Eli had over 60 signatures. Enough to trigger a special election. They submitted the petition to the HOA board. Linda, caught off guard, tried to delay the response. But the bylaws were clear. A community-wide vote had to take place within 30 days. The stage was set. With her position under threat, Linda launched a counteroffensive. The next HOA bulletin, normally filled with landscaping tips and pest control updates, featured a section titled "Know Who You Trust." It didn't name Eli directly but painted a suspicious portrait of a recent returnee with no documented employment history, making baseless accusations and stoking division in our peaceful community. Soon after, neighbors started receiving anonymous flyers in their mailboxes. "Eli Carpenter. What's he really after?" The paper listed half-truths and twisted facts. That Eli had left a lucrative job in Dallas under mysterious circumstances. That he was using his father's illness for sympathy. That he had ties to outside political groups. Some of Eli's allies wavered. A few stopped responding to messages. Even Marcus seemed more cautious. But Eli stayed focused. He held an open house meeting, this time hosted in the Graysons' backyard, and spoke plainly. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about what kind of community we want to live in. One where we help each other, or one where fear and power decide everything." To prove his integrity, he released his own employment records and explained why he'd left Dallas, to care for his father, not because of any scandal. He shared the full audit petition and offered to let anyone review the evidence themselves. That night, he received an email from a woman he didn't know. Samantha Yoon, a resident who worked as a paralegal. She had proof that Linda had used HOA funds to pay for spa retreats, not community development, as claimed. Eli smiled. The truth was starting to shine through the cracks in Linda's fortress. The Glenwood Ridge clubhouse had never seen so many people in one room. Folding chairs lined the walls, every seat filled. Neighbors stood along the back wall and in the doorway, murmuring. The air was thick with tension and whispered theories. Eli sat near the front, file folder in hand, sweat forming at the base of his neck. The special meeting was about to begin. Linda Hargrave entered 10 minutes late, flanked by 2 uniformed security guards, not HOA compliance officers but private. Security from an outside firm. It was a power move, designed to intimidate. Her signature red jacket gleamed under the lights, and her trademark pearls clung tightly to her neck, like a noose made of entitlement. "I'd like to call this meeting to order," she said, tapping the gavel. Before Eli could rise, Linda launched into a tirade. "This community is under siege by falsehoods. A few disgruntled individuals, some of whom haven't paid their dues on time, are manipulating facts and inciting fear. Their so-called audit is a political stunt. Their petition legally questionable. Eli stood, raising his voice to be heard. The petition followed bylaws to the letter. The signatures are valid. The board must honor the vote. Gasps echoed from the crowd as Linda slammed her palm on the podium. I will not allow this circus to ruin everything we've built. You mean everything you've taken? Someone shouted from the back. Mr. Grayson, the crowd murmured. A few clapped. Linda turned crimson, her grip on the gavel tightening. This vote is invalid. But then the board secretary, a quiet man named Harold Linwood, rose and cleared his throat. Madam President, according to Section 7.3 of the HOA Charter, if 35% or more homeowners submit a petition requesting a recall, the board must schedule and facilitate a vote within 30 days. We have 62 valid signatures. The vote will proceed. A hush fell. Eli met Linda's glare. For the first time, he saw uncertainty behind her eyes. When the meeting resumed after a short break, Eli took the podium. I never wanted to be here, he began. But when I came back to take care of my father, I saw a community living in fear. That wasn't the place I remembered. He pulled out a thick binder. These are financial statements, public records, verified and reviewed. Over $80,000 spent on security consulting, but no receipts, no invoices, no record of services rendered, and $23,800 from the president's discretionary fund used at spas, restaurants, and luxury hotels. None of this was approved by the board. Murmurs filled the room. Eli passed copies of the key pages down the aisle. Some neighbors flipped through. Others simply stared. Linda stood stiffly behind the table, motionless. This isn't about control, Eli continued. It's about accountability, about restoring trust. No one, no president, no board, should have unchecked power. We deserve better. Samantha Yoon, the paralegal who'd come forward, stood next. I verified these records, she said, holding up her own printouts. The funds were misused, and under Texas HOA law, this is considered fraud. A stunned silence fell. Then a ripple of applause. Linda stood, shaking. These documents were obtained illegally. This is a smear, campaign against a woman who has given 10 years to this community. But she wasn't yelling anymore. Her voice cracked near the end, and her hand trembled as she clutched the gavel. The crowd wasn't buying it. The vote was swift and final. Each homeowner was handed a ballot, yes, to recall the president, no to retain. The process was supervised by a volunteer third-party accountant and the HOA secretary, Harold. It took 20 minutes to count. By a vote of 54-8, Harold announced, Linda Hargrave is hereby removed as president of the Glenwood Ridge HOA. The clubhouse erupted. Cheers, claps, a few relieved sobs. Linda stood silently, shoulders hunched before turning to leave without a word. Her security guards followed her out. In her wake, the HOA board stood stunned. A few longtime allies of Linda quietly resigned in the following days. Others scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. But for the first time in years, the community felt awake. Within the week, an emergency board meeting was held to appoint an interim president. Eli declined nomination. He wasn't interested in power. But he recommended Samantha, and the board voted unanimously to instate her. A forensic audit was launched. A separate committee began the process of returning improperly charged fines to residents. Legal counsel was consulted to determine whether criminal charges against Linda were viable. Glenwood Ridge had started to cleanse itself, but not without growing pains. Even after Linda's removal, Eli didn't rest. He worked with Samantha and the board to rewrite portions of the HOA bylaws. They added transparency measures, public monthly financial reports, independent audits every year, and a rotating compliance committee made up of volunteers. not private contractors. Eli proposed a community mediation council that would handle minor violations with a focus on resolution, not punishment. The idea was to bring people together, not pit neighbor against neighbor. The board voted to dissolve the contract with the private security firm that Linda had hired and repurpose those funds to repair shared sidewalks, repaint faded signs, and revitalize the park near the retention pond. Trust, once shattered, was beginning to take root again. Eli refused every offer to become a permanent board member. He preferred to stay in the background. But when the community organized a volunteer appreciation event, he was asked to speak. "I didn't do this alone," he told them. "You all stood up. You all said enough. Glenwood Ridge belongs to you, not to any one person. Remember that." The applause that followed was not thunderous. It was warm, personal. A community recognizing one of its own. Months passed. Spring arrived in Glenwood Ridge with gentle rains and blooming dogwoods. The street that once felt stifling now bustled with small joys. Children riding bikes without being scolded for noise. Neighbors chatting over fences instead of fearing anonymous complaints. Eli's father, Harold, began to improve with steady care. His memory still faded at times, but he laughed more now, especially on warm evenings when he and Eli sat on the porch sipping lemonade. The wildflowers in the backyard were no longer a violation. They were featured in the new Glenwood Garden Tour, a monthly community walk organized by residents. One afternoon, Mrs. Dietrich brought over a peach pie, smiling broadly. "I feel like I can breathe again," she said. "Thank you, Eli." "I just lit the match," he replied. "You all made the fire burn." The fear was gone. In its place, conversations, shared dinners, community cleanups. People who'd once lived side by side in silence were learning to know each other again. As for Linda Hargrave, she'd moved out of Glenwood Ridge weeks after the vote. Word was she was facing a civil suit over the misappropriated funds, but no one spoke her name much anymore. What mattered was what remained. A neighborhood healed by truth, and a man who came home to protect his father, but ended up saving something even bigger.